morning, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. I am sitting in the veggie patch of my Portland, Oregon permaculture garden. Had kind of a unpleasant week with lots of unexpected stuff happening, lots of unexpected crap happening. My dog got tangled in the charging cord of my laptop and pulled it off my desk and absolutely destroyed it. Spent several hours trying to recover the hard drive and it's just completely toast. So I had to buy a laptop I wasn't expecting. Then I had a couple of other dramatic things happen and ended up having some expenses I wasn't expecting. And then yesterday, my water heater died. Now, that wasn't an unexpected expense. My water heater is from 1992, so I got way more out of it than I should have, and we were living on borrowed time. So I had been saving for a new water heater. But I had this string of other expenses I wasn't anticipating, so it felt like a difficult, felt like a big frustration and a big hassle and a big burden. I had to actually boil water to wash my hair this morning. I think it's still wet. Just a rough week. But it really got me thinking about how when we face difficult, unexpected expenses, how that really can challenge our stability, our sustainability, our self-reliance, and what that means when we're thinking about building a resilient way of living, a resilient homestead, and how we manage those unexpected expenses. Now, sometimes you can make wiggle room in your budget, and I know I'm really, really good with budgeting, and I'm like the queen of penny pinching. But sometimes you can't anticipate everything that's going to come along, especially when it's a cluster of expenses that you weren't planning for. And I know for some people, the resulting issue is food insecurity, because you have to start borrowing from your food budget to pay for other things. And that's a huge issue here in America, where you sometimes have to make the decision between, am I going to seek health care or am I going to have food on my table? Am I going to have to make dramatic changes in the food purchases I make in order to afford to pay for an unexpected expense that I can't escape? So I thought today, let's talk about perennial food crops and how they can help increase our resiliency. Because for me, I know that even if I am stressed to the point of financially of having to meet several unexpected expenses, I'm not going to go hungry and my family is not going to go hungry. Now, I do not grow or produce all our own food. I buy wheat and rice and sugar and oats. And I also buy 1/4 of a grass-fed, grass-finished, locally produced regenerative cow share every year. And we buy our cheese and dairy and things like that. And sometimes we buy junk convenience food because, let's be real, that's real life. So I don't produce all my own food, but I do know that if we were slammed with some kind of horrendous bill for something, I could still feed my family out of my yard. I could find a way to feed my family for months out of my garden. And that's because we produce thousands of pounds of food here a year on our 1/4 acre. A chunk of that is from annual veggies, like this really lush, happy summer squash here behind me, but the bulk of it is from perennial food crops. And I don't think that's the average, the typical ratio for your average American gardener. The majority of the food crops that we grow here are perennial fruits and nuts and vegetables. So let's talk about that today and how that provides a diverse and sustaining diet that you can fall back on to increase your resiliency, your self-sufficiency, and help you be a more food secure homesteader in the face of adversity. I want to talk about 9 things I think about when choosing perennial food crops. I have lots of videos on annual veggies. I have an upcoming video on starting brassicas in my garden for the winter. because I'm doing that this week. So I do get a lot of caloric output and a lot of nutrition from annual veggies. But today I want to talk about choosing perennial food crops because they are things that you invest in once, either in seeds, starts, cuttings, and they produce food for you consistently and tend to produce an increasing yield over the years for 10, 20, 100 years. Number one is, will you eat it? Do you enjoy this food? Will your family eat it? Do you know how to prepare it? Don't grow something if you're not going to eat it. What you'll find is that you'll either be giving it away to people and you will have invested time and energy and labor into a plant, a yield of a food crop that you are not even going to eat. And why go through that, taking up space in your garden, money out of your budget in order to just put something in the compost, right? Let me give you an example. I do not like brown turkey figs. They grow extremely well here. Lots of Portlanders grow them in their garden, and I don't like them. So I was not going to give them a spot in my garden, even though they met all kinds of other criteria for a good choice for my garden. I made a point of taste testing figs before I decided what to put in my garden. I grow Negrone and Desert King. I made sure I liked the flavor of them before I bothered evaluating whether they met other criteria and would do well in my permaculture food forest. Number two, does it enhance your health and can you learn to enjoy it? So just because something is a crop that you don't enjoy right now, it's new to you, you've never grown it before, could you learn to? Is it something that provides a nutrition and health benefit to you? And maybe your palate just needs to be acclimated to it. Maybe you just need to get in touch with some folks who know how to prepare this unusual food really well. An example is sunchoke, which is also called Jerusalem artichoke. I grow it in my garden. When I first grew it, a number of people in my family didn't enjoy it because it tends to cause gas in some people. Now, I must have guts of steel or something. It doesn't bother me at all. But sunchokes have a high inulin content, and they can produce gas and discomfort in people. So I typically roast it or slice it and fry it and find it quite tasty. But what it took for me was talking to other people who've grown it for years to know that if you cook it in your crock pot on low for 8 hours with some veggie broth or chicken broth and you mash it and make a mash from it, that inulin really breaks down and it's much more digestible for people who are sensitive to it. So that made all the difference in it provides a health benefit, it's a caloric staple, it grows easily. Would we eat it? Could we learn to like it? It was about learning the proper preparation and giving our palates time to adjust. Number three is thinking about climate change and the climate resilience of the plants you are choosing. I talked about this in a recent video. Because we are facing warmer summers and more adverse weather events, can your plants handle it? I noticed, for example, that my blueberries all got tremendous sunburn unless they were grown under the shade of a tree in my food forest, but my service berries did incredibly well and seemed super happy with 115-degree temperatures. They weren't bothered at all and got no sunburn. So when we're thinking about investing in perennial food crops that we enjoy eating, we need to think about whether they can handle a climate change future. How well will they handle those hot summers or flood events or whatever it is we're going to be experiencing? How much of a strong, hardy plant are they that can handle a diverse range of weather conditions? Number four, what else does our perennial food crop yield? Does it give you timber, medicine, fiber? A great example of this is my hazelnut tree. I coppice it every year for firewood. It produces about 2 weeks worth of our winter firewood supply. I use the long straight stakes for stakes in the garden and all kinds of other building purposes, and the wood lasts a long time. So I get a yield of nuts from it every year that I really enjoy. It's a native plant and disease and pest resistant. And I also get an additional yield of wood. In permaculture, we call this stacking functions. We look for plants that can do more than one job, that can do as many jobs as possible. So something to think about is that most of our fruit tree crops, like cherry and quince and apple and apricot, all have good hard wood and burn hot. So if you have a rocket stove like the summer kitchen one I am building, or you need a good source of fire starter, I get buckets and buckets and buckets of prunings every year as an additional yield off of my fruit trees. Another thing to think about in terms of what does it yield, does it provide shade and microclimate enhancement? This is really important. As I just mentioned, my blueberries got really scorched if they were in full sun. So thinking about the fact that you can use those food producing tree crops to give you shade and help create microclimates, create a shelter from the wind so that your plants, your other food producing plants can do better and are more bolstered and supported in your garden. So when we talk about yields, we're not necessarily only talking about what we can harvest and bring in. We are talking about enhancements to our garden. Number 5, do you have the space for it? Every year, I wish I had not planted my Illinois everbearing mulberry in the back of my property. I thought I will pollard this tree every year and keep it under control. It's too big. It's too big for my garden. I should have picked a smaller variety of mulberry or skipped a mulberry altogether. Even though I get a great yield off of it, not only of tons and tons of biomass in the form of all of the prunings I have to take off and leaves and how they provide a great amount of mulch in my garden, but it's just too much work and it's too big of a tree, even though I get tons of fruit off of it. So think about whether something will fit in your space. Number 6, do you need it for breeding? When making purchases of perennial food crops, think about whether they are grafted or hybrid. Are you wanting to reproduce this plant either to have more of it in your garden or in order to sell starts of it? It makes a big difference if you have something that is grafted or a hybrid. It makes it much more difficult to be able to propagate it on your own. So consider your needs in the future. Is this the one and only example you want of it on your property? Do you want to make more of it? Number 7, how does it yield? Are you looking at a plant that produces one huge crop that ripens all at once over a short period of time? For example, my Cox's orange pippin apple tree. Or are you looking at something that produces weeks and weeks of smaller harvests like June berries or golden raspberries? Are you looking at something that produces one large yield that stores for a long period of time like nuts, which can be kept for years? Or are you looking at something that is more delicate and ephemeral and produces a large crop that you have to preserve, can dehydrate in some sort of way very quickly, like quince, which despite being very hard and a late producing fruit, do not have a long shelf life. How can you handle the harvest? That's really important. Thinking about how it works into your life and your schedule and what the harvest season looks like. Number 8, disease and pest resistance. This is a big one for me. If you watch my channel much, you know that I am a big fan of sheer total utter neglect. I am a fan of not having to baby anything in my garden except for my Ashmead's kernel apple and my Cox's orange pippin apple. I want something that is hardy and produces well without needing a significant amount of management. Now, having a super healthy, fertile soil microbiome to help create the most healthy tree crop or perennial crop possible reduces disease and pest issues because the tree or plant is stronger and better able to resist that pressure. But even so, not everything is suited for every climate. Example, when we first bought this property, one of the first fruit trees I put in was an apricot. I love apricots so much. Absolutely my favorite fruit tree crop. This tree struggled with every fungal disease there was, and particularly shot leaf disease. It also got bacterial canker. I tried everything I could. I even resorted to using copper fungicides when normally I don't do something like that. Eventually, I cut down the tree and gave up. And I put in my figs, which have no pest or disease problems, and only the very top figs get pecked by birds. So for me, it wasn't worth growing apricots if they were going to be that much of a hassle, require that much of an input on my part. All right, I keep taking breaks to help with water heater installation. My best friend is here helping us with it. So I'm gonna finish this video now because I can't fit in the doorway and help them with what they're doing now. So number 9, does it bring diversity to your diet that you cannot get in another way for an affordable price? For me, I know this is going to sound like I'm contradicting number 1 on my list a little bit, and perhaps I am, but this is hugely important for me. I think that we improve our overall health and well-being if we can eat a broader diversity of foods. Americans eat a very narrow range of species when there are so many more things available to us if we will just learn to expand our palate and open our minds. Part of the reason I feel this is so important, besides the individual benefit to me and my own body, is because it makes me a more resilient food producer. It makes me a more resilient gardener. By growing a broader array of foods, not only do I expand my palate, I broaden the joy and pleasure of my eating experience by eating a richer array of foods, but it also means that I am a more resilient gardener and I have more food security, because as I am growing plants that are maybe more typical and more well known, if those food crops fail, perhaps my more native and more unusual perennial food crops will continue to give me a yield. So I'm hedging my bets by trying a larger range of food crops. So I'll say that rarity is a huge factor for me. If I can't source something from another local farmer, or I can't get it in the grocery store sustainably produced, if it's not available anywhere else, I want to grow it in my garden. If I am growing things like Munger blackcap raspberries, fall gold, golden raspberries, rare varieties of quince that do extremely well and resist disease pressure in my garden, I get a little kick out of that. I get a little thrill out of being able to cultivate something that I can only enjoy because I have produced it from the soil, from the ground, on my own property, by the work of my own hands. That's really rewarding for me. It's a really enjoyable experience, both in the growing, the harvesting, the knowledge that I have grown something unique that I could only get by doing it myself, and then I get to enjoy eating it, and I get to enjoy sharing it with friends. So just think about that. I know number 1 is, will you eat it? But I hope after working through this list, you will consider expanding the kinds of foods that you grow, so that when we're talking about perennial food crops, we're not just talking about walnuts and red raspberries and rhubarb, but we're thinking about things that we haven't grown before and that the modern American palate is not acclimated to, but very easily could, and it will enrich our eating experience, it will enrich our gardens, it will increase our resilience. So think about trying those things like skirret and good King Henry and Turkish rocket, and think about whether you want to try eating your hostas. Think about growing rare varieties of plums and apples and other typical garden fruits that perhaps are going to do far better in your climate than the standard varieties, but also will give you a flavor experience and a storage potential that you will really, really benefit from. You don't have to stick to Red Delicious and Granny Smith as your apple options. There are thousands of varieties, and many of them are suited, acclimated, special, and thrive in your climate where you're at. So don't limit yourself. Realize that there is a huge range of perennial food crops that you can grow to increase your resiliency and also increase your enjoyment, not only in your garden, but in your diet. So thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about permaculture gardening and resilient living, please click subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my Patreon in the description. If you aren't up for becoming a regular contributor every month, I have a PayPal and you could throw a couple of bucks at me if you enjoyed this video and learned something from it. That helps support my family of 6 and helps me continue to make more and more videos about resilient living so that we can enjoy our gardens more, so that we can learn to design a better society, a better way of living, so that all people can thrive and the earth can heal. Thank you so much. I'll be back soon.